Hey everyone, Jamie here from TechnicalCafe.com. Welcome to your 13th Java tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to be creating a simple number averaging program in Java that asks the user for the number of values they'd like to have averaged, and then what it's going to do is ask the user for these actual numbers, after which it's going to calculate the average of them and then print the average to the screen. So this is actually the code that I wrote before this tutorial for it, and this is what the program is going to end up looking like. So how many values would you like to average? Let's go ahead and say let's say 2, and we'll say enter a number, so we'll say 100, and then we'll say 50, and it's going to give us the average of 75. Let's go ahead and do it again, so we'll say, we'll enter 3, and we're going to enter 2, 3, and let's say 7. And we're going to have an average of 4. You'll notice that 4 here is a double. It has one decimal place after it, and these are all integers. And the reason for this is so that we don't lose precision when we're dividing the numbers to get the average. So we're dividing integers into a double here. So let's go ahead and clear the code here and start off from scratch. Alright, so the code's cleared out, and what we have now is the average number class and the main method inside of it. And what we're going to be doing is entering our code within this main method here. Since we're going to be getting user input, the first thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and import the scanner class. So import java.util.scanner with a capital S, because it is a class name within the java.util package. And let's talk about the logistics of this first. So what we're going to want to need, what we're going to want to have in this program is a couple of statements to ask the user or tell the user what to do in the program. And then we're going to need to scan in some information, and we're also going to need a loop to collect information as well. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create some variables. We'll create some integers, and the first one is going to be the number of values. So we'll call this variable num values, and we'll set it equal to 0. And this is just going to be the number of values that are going to be entered in to be averaged. We're going to create another integer called total, and we'll set that equal to 0 actually. And what the total is just the total of whatever values are entered in. And this later on will be divided, total will be divided by num values to give us an average later on in the program. We can't actually divide them now. If we tried, we'd get a division by 0 exception, and that wouldn't allow the program to run any further. So now that we have our values, or our variables rather, we're going to have to ask the user to start filling in these with some values. So the first thing I want to do is prompt them by saying system.out.println, and we'll say please enter the number of values you'd like to have averaged. It's a little bit of a longer sentence, but it works. And then we're going to use the scanner to store that number in num values. So let's go ahead and create an object of the scanner class right above this, and we'll say scanner input equals new scanner system.in. And if you recall from the last tutorial, scanner is the object type that we're creating. Input is the name of that object, so input is an object of scanner class. And we're creating a new scanner object called input. And within this parameter list here, which is actually the constructor method, we're passing system.in in. And what that means is that we're just getting input from the keyboard. So now that we have this here, we can say num values equals input, which is our object, dot next int. And what next int is it's a method within the scanner class that's going to get the next integer that's typed into the keyboard. And in order to basically say that you're using a method of the class, you can just use input dot method. So class name, object name dot method of the class. So let's go ahead and compile and run this right now just to make sure that everything's working properly. So please enter the number of values. We'll say 10, and then the program is terminated. Everything works perfectly. The next thing we're going to want to do is actually get the values from the user. So now that we know we need X number of values, we're going to actually have to get those values. So in order to do this, we're going to use a for loop, and we'll say for int I equals 0. We're going to start off at 0. I is less than num values. And the reason we're using a less than and not less than or equal to is because we're starting at 0 instead of 1. So if we had an equal to, it would go over the number of this. It would be one more than whatever this number of values is, and that would cause an error. And then for each iteration of the loop, we're just going to increment by 1. So within our for loop here, what we're going to do is prompt the user. So we'll say system.out.println, and we'll say please enter a number. And let's just add a period here. And for each number that the user enters, what we're going to do is store that in a variable called int, so we'll an integer variable called num. So int num equals, and this number is going to be set equal to whatever the user types. So we're going to need another scanner object for that. So input dot next int. And what we're going to do now is actually store these values together in a running total, which will be stored in the total variable up here. So we'll say total plus equals, and plus equals is the same thing as saying equals total plus whatever. So we'll say plus equals num. So what's going to happen here is that the user is going to input a number which is going to be stored in the num variable, and then that num variable is going to be added to the total. So if they input 5, it's going to be added to 5, and if they input 10, they're going to have 15. It's just going to keep going for as long as the loop iterates. And let's go ahead and check this out, make sure this works. Let's say 3 values, enter a number, 1, 2, 3. And it stops after that, so we know that this works. And now what we're going to want to do after getting these is actually create the average, or calculate the average of the values that were entered in. And in order to do this, we're going to say, we're going to create a variable, a double variable, so double, and we'll say average num equals. And in order to get the average, all we need to do is divide the total number by the number of values that are there. So we'll say total divided by num values. And what's going to happen now is we're actually going to get some truncation because we're dividing 2 integers and storing it in a double. So what we're going to need to do is actually cast one of these to a double. So we'll say double. And casting basically means that we're just going to temporarily make whatever value is in here, or whatever value is next to the cast, whatever value is in here. So we're going to make this temporarily a double for the time being, just for this calculation. And that should give us a little bit more precision here. So let's go ahead and run this, and actually let's print the value to the screen, we can't forget that. So we'll say average, and then we'll concatenate on the average number. So this average is calculated, stored in average num. We casted the value of total to a double just so we can ensure that we have precision. We don't want anything to be truncated, and then we just print that value out to the screen. And let's go ahead and run this. Please enter the number of values you'd like to have average. Let's say 2. We'll say 150, and we get 75.0. Let's do it one more time to see if our truncation doesn't happen. And we'll say 2 values, and we'll say 10 and 7, or 10 and 5 rather, and we get 7.5. So we do have some degree of precision here that we didn't have if we just used an integer. If we made this an integer, what would happen is we would actually lose precision. This would just be 7.0, and I can show you that here. We gotta get rid of the cast, actually. And so we'll say enter the number of values 2, and we'll say 10 and 5, and we just have 7. So you want to have that cast there and have this as a double so that you have precision. Otherwise you'll get a truncation. So this is it. This is a basic number averaging program in Java. Feel free to play around with it. You maybe change the for loop to a while loop or something to get unlimited number of values and have an exit condition, something like that. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments or send me a message at the Technical Cafe website. You can also send me a message on Twitter at twitter.com/jamiemcg or twitter.com/technicalcafe. Feel free to send any tutorial ideas, and thank you for watching. I appreciate it.